Dear Diary.
Dear Diary.
Dear Diary, wow, today was a really hard day.
Dear Diary, I find sometimes my life can be hard.
Dear Diary, it will pass and it will be okay.
Dear Diary, I feel like today is going to be...
Shh, the Indigo Diaries. Dear Diary, welcome world to the Indigo Diaries, and welcome back to series not 3, but 1, The World Through Your Eyes, with your host, me, Natasha Hickling. The Indigo Diaries is a podcast for those who want to learn about ADHD through others and our own experiences. And I can't actually believe that we're back in series 1. It's probably been about 6 months since I've done series 1. And we've got no expert here today, just me. Oh, we do have a guest, but he's not really going to be a guest today. And the fact is, because we're almost going back, this is episode 22, but we're almost going back to where it all started. I started this podcast because I wanted people to be able to share their story for themselves, but also for others, because sometimes support groups and things like that could be quite daunting. And I wanted people to have a way to hear people's stories, because it not only normalizes it, but it also makes you feel like you're not alone in this world. And I started it with me because I really wanted to share my story. And we're coming back to me. And you may think kind of, why me again, right? You know, I thought we'd had your episode of series on episode 1. However, that was before kind of the last few months have happened, right? You know, I was diagnosed, it's almost coming up to 4 years now with ADHD. And before I jump the gun, I'm going to do what, you know, I'm trying to go straight into it. I've got the person here today with me that I actually did the first episode with, because I just find it really weird to like tell my story by myself. So welcome back, my partner in crime, Benjamin Stevens. But Ben,
How's it going? Yeah, nice to be back. Yeah, I didn't think I would be doing this again for a while. We'll do a quick bio for Natasha. 30 years old now. From the UK, we live together now in York, just outside York. 3 pets, traveling and living abroad for 6 years. I'm not saying fur babies. Yeah. So she started off first neurodevelopmental diagnosis, OCD, anxiety at age 16, dyslexia and dyspraxia at 21, ADHD at 27, and now another one. Mm-hmm. She's a ADHD life coach for young adults and teens through the business Indigo Hub. So, talk to me.
Well, firstly, I want to just say, why on earth did you not say 3 fur babies? I wrote to say 3 fur babies, but I knew he would say. Anyway, so Ben is my partner of 8 years, and he didn't think he'd be back here again, but here he is. And yeah,
let's do it.
So, your first question.
Oh, where do you want to start? Why are we doing this again?
So, about 4 weeks ago now, about 4 weeks,
something like that.
I was diagnosed with a condition called autism. Okay, so I firstly just kind of want to start with there are so many terms for autism now. So you can call it ASD, which is autism spectrum disorder, or you can call it ASC, which is autism spectrum condition. There has been a lot of talk about, is it level 1? Is it high functioning? Is it Asperger's? But actually, I asked my doctor, and it's actually called autism. There's a spectrum, right? It's like ADHD, there's a spectrum, but the actual diagnosis now is autism. And yeah, I've been diagnosed with autism.
Yeah, how about that? So you suspected it for a little while before we kind of started going through the diagnostic process. So how did you kind of come to that suspicion?
I think after I was diagnosed with ADHD, about 4 years ago. And I think even after I was diagnosed, there were so many questions. So like, you know, we dive into the light bulb moment. I've got ADHD. You dive into that kind of hyperfixation, hyper-focus. You start learning all about it. But as I was learning all about it and I started seeing an ADHD coach, after a while, I was like, there's still so many things like my sensory, my social, and kind of my repetitive behaviors, but I'll go into that later. And there was still so much. So I remember when we lived in Malaysia, I reached out to an occupational therapist, and we worked a lot on like my sensory kind of struggles. And I think I then knew there was something else, but then I was diagnosed there with sensory processing disorder, because over there, like, autism is not really seen in adults, it's only really seen in kids. And I think I knew back then, but I don't think, you know, it didn't really click for me. It actually didn't click till earlier this year. So I've done a family course in ADCO, which is the ADD Coach Academy. If anyone's interested in becoming an ADHD Life coach, I did a family course where we were looking about social programs for children with ADHD and autism. And I started reading all these things, and I was like, yep. And someone in the class was actually talking about a specific child with autism, and I was like, oh my days, no. And I was thinking, it's almost like, you know, when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I went to that conference and I heard that lady talking, and she was talking about ADHD and dyslexia and talking about all these things, and I was like, yeah. And it was like the same moment as in this class, and I was like, yeah. Oh my goodness. But like, when, like, I thought about it in May earlier this year, but I wasn't ready, like, because you weren't home. So like, Ben, we had 6 months apart, didn't we? So Ben wasn't home. I was living with my parents. There was a lot going on, so I don't think I was ready. So I kind of just took my time and learnt more about it. And then a few people I know were recently diagnosed with it, and I was like, oh my gosh, we're quite alike. Then I read did this questionnaire which was about kind of autism with women traits, and I was like, yes, yeah, I've got autism.
Yeah, and then from there it was like, right, we need to sort of do this properly, right, and get an official sort of report and diagnosis for it. So what was that like, the diagnostic process, I should say?
I think that the diagnostic, it's like any diagnostic process. I had to go private just because I can't wait, right? I know it's really hard at the minute, you know, and obviously I'm very lucky that we're in that position where I can pay to go private. And I mean, it was very, very, very expensive. So a lot more than an ADHD diagnosis, but that's because it was a lot more thorough. But honestly, the diagnosis process was hard, but it was amazing. Like, we definitely paid for what we got. Like, I did a lot of research. I went to a lot of places. I did a lot, you know, and there were some places that said like 3 months, 5 months, 10 months. And there was one place that could get me in next week. And I was like, yeah, okay, we'll go there. And like, it was so thorough. Like, so I had an 1.5 to 2 hour interview in person where I had to do, it was very kiddish. But apparently that's the only way that they can prove it, because they don't have that adult kind of, they need tests. They need, like, it's called like observational tests. It's called the ADOS, but they don't have an adult version. So they kind of adapt the kid version, because they have to be able to, you can't, like, for autism, it's not just about questionnaires like it is for ADHD and interviews. There needs to be some sort of, like, they can see it as well. So they did like observations of me doing like different things. So like, I had to make a story up, and, you know, and then we like discuss stuff. And then I had to fill out so many questionnaires. I mean, it was just, I like questionnaires, so it was good. And then Ben, you and my mum had a 4-hour interview.
Oh, it was a great way to spend an evening.
They had a 4-hour interview. My mum was in Canada and you were here, and it had a 4-hour interview. And then they then went and wrote my course. But what I really liked is that they'd realized that I a lot of my things I'd masked, because a lot of my kind of autism traits I'd masked for quite a long time. So they might have not come up in kind of the stuff. So they actually decided to dive deeper into that, ask me a lot of questions about masking, and give me more like questionnaires and stuff about masking, which I really like. They obviously had a lot of knowledge about women with ASD, because it's very, very different to kind of men or boys, or, you know, it's just very different. And so they took that into consideration. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a full report with a kind of ASD diagnosis, and the report was incredible. It was like 16 pages. It was a lot to read. It was a lot to go through. And then I had kind of like a follow-up interview. So the process was grueling. It was hard, wasn't it? But it was thorough.
Yeah, just to go back to that masking. the interview was that I did with your mum was supposed to, it was like 5 years old versus now. So like you're saying with the masking, a lot of the questions she was asking, your mum wasn't aware of. And then obviously because we've been away, your mum hasn't known you as well for the last 6 years or so. So I could see a lot of the things that she was asking about, whereas your mum couldn't see. So, you know, it might have been, you know, if people are masking and they're thinking about getting diagnosed and they're aware of that, it's worth having someone there that knows what you really like
without the mask.
Yeah. Without yeah, because if your mum had been the only person that was interviewed, it might have been that they said, oh well, she's not displayed this as a child, you know, she's just sort of got traits of it, and perhaps it's just the ADHD.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, because obviously you know me without the mask, because in the last 4 years especially, like I've been,
well, especially during lockdown, because we couldn't leave the apartment, could we?
No. And like the last 4 years of me, my exploration with ADHD and becoming a coach and all that, I don't mask anymore to an extent, right?
Yeah.
So you've been able to see me without the mask when, you know, before I was diagnosed, when I was in the UK with my parents and my family and my friends, I was always masking.
Right.
So they had this sense of me masking, which probably didn't seem like I had autism, that's a great point.
Thanks very much. That's what I just have to get there. You've already talked about that one. Oh, okay. So when did you first sort of realize then that you had autism?
I think that, like, going back to like when I was a kid and all that, I think that like I mean, like obviously I only first realized in like April, which I talked about earlier, where it all clicked. But I think that when I, you know, because obviously in the last 4 weeks I've had to trace back, well, to be honest, it's been since May, because I've kind of known, but just not had that kind of, you know, this is what it is. But I think I've always seen it. I think for me the biggest thing for me is that it's always been there. And I actually think it's, you know, some ways it's more apparent than my ADHD, but my ADHD is more external, but my ASD has been more internal. And I've done a lot of masking, which I said, to kind of, and if people don't know what masking is kind of a coping technique for us to try and fit into the world. So we, you know, we see people's behavior, we see how people act, so then we mimic it. And then we, you know, one way doesn't work, another way doesn't work, and then we try and kind of find our own way of doing it, and we're almost trying to be everybody else to try and fit in. And it's all about, you know, it's about putting on these different masks, almost like a show, right? You know, putting on all these different characters to fit into the world, because we don't, right? And that's what masking is. And I think you know, going back to my ADHD diagnosis, I always said that I first realized when I got to kind of secondary school, and it was kind of like, wait a minute, I don't have the same interests as people. I can't look at people in the eyes. I find it really difficult to distinguish people's emotions, which is why I got in a lot of trouble, why people call me naive, innocent, bit of a weirdo, because I used to stare at people, because I used to watch people, right? I used to, like, it sounds really weird. Like, I used to watch people because I didn't know how to behave. I didn't know how to be. I didn't know what cues came up. I didn't know. And then if things changed, I get really stressed. So then, you know, I had panic attacks, but it weren't panic attacks, it was sensory overload. It was just so many things. And I think the last kind of few weeks have kind of really been kind of going back and realizing that it's always been there, but it's just, I didn't know the name of it. But I think for me, when I first kind of realized it was when I was 15. And that's when obviously I got diagnosed with OCD. And OCD is actually like more commonly with autism than it is ADHD. ADHD is more common with anxiety and depression. And my OCD was very much around taking control of things, and because the world is so out of control for me, but my ASD needs control, and I need things in order. And when things are not, I get stressed. So it became an obsession.
Yeah.
And it was like a coping mechanism for coping in the world the way I do. And for me, that was the biggest sign. Like, it's quite funny, we talked about this, is that my when I was at university, my dissertation was in drama therapy with children with autism. And that was very random. Like my mum works with this SEN children in an SEN school, and out of every like disability or condition, I chose autism. I mean, it's always been there. Like I knew more about autism than I did ADHD, but it's funny how it took ADHD came out before ASD.
So why did you think then, if it's always been there, why was it not picked up?
I think that it's just the masking.
Yeah.
I think it comes back to the masking, but also the fact that I think with autism, it is very much misinterpreted as a child with ear defenders that screams, that may be nonverbal, that can't sense to be the world. And that's not me. Like we've been traveling for the last 6 years, you know, like it's just not me.
Yeah.
And I think that when I was a kid and when I transitioned into high school, and it was like, right, I've got to fit in. And I remember making that conscious choice, which I spoke about in the last one. And I made that conscious choice to, I got to fit in now. I don't fit in. I've got to fit in. And I think that because of that, and because the way my family is, and because of all these things, it just wasn't picked up. And I think that, you know, it obviously was I picked it up because I went to the doctors when I was 15, you know, and said, I need help.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this and I'm not going to go over that again, but when I got diagnosed with, you know, anxiety and OCD, but back then, I mean, that's like 15 years ago, people didn't have that recognition of what autism is in girls.
Yeah.
Right. In teenage that actually have a few friends, but I never really had a group of friends. I never really had a lot of friends. I really struggled in groups. I've always really struggled in groups. I never really, change was really hard. I like things in a certain order. I've always had special interests. Like it was all there. It just, I think,
didn't click.
Yeah, and I think like my degree is in acting, right? So I just became a very good actor. But then obviously because I was so good at acting, then it brought out anxiety and OCD because it had to come out somewhere. You know, I was trying to use these coping mechanism of having panic attacks and all things and get rid of sensory overload. But that was having a really harsh effect on me and my mental health because I didn't know the name of it.
Yeah.
And I'm a good actor.
Excellent. Well, this is an ADHD podcast. Time to give the people what they want. There are a lot of similarities between ADHD and ASD, and that's perhaps part of the reason as well why it wasn't picked up sooner. But there are also some key differences that people can not look out for, is perhaps not the right word, but notice or be aware of. So what are they? Okay,
well, I'll tell you kind of from my point of view rather than like the book point of view. But there are like, you know, a lot of people with ADHD struggle with, you know, executive function challenges. They struggle with, you know, memory. They struggle with kind of emotions. They struggle with sensory. But I think for me, like when I was diagnosed and I went to my ADHD coach, I remember I'd go and I'd like have all the stuff and then I'd do like extra research and I'd always do the thing and then I'd come with everything in order, everything had to make sense. And like I would come over prepared. I would like come really early. I would turn up really, I'd be on time. I'd have it all written down, all this stuff. And she was like, what, you've done the tasks? And I'd be like, yeah, I've done it. And she'd be like, okay. And I'd be like, why? She goes, a lot of my clients like that, you know, it takes them a while to like, you know, be accountable and do all this stuff. And then I was like, oh, no, I don't. Yeah, I'm here ready. I said, oh, I've done all this extra research. And she was like, okay. And then like I'd come and we'd be talking and I'd be like, oh, I'll go and write it in my diary. She's like, you've got a diary? And I'm like, yeah, I've got like 5 diaries. And she says, oh, okay, so how do you do it? Diaries? Oh, no, I'm very good at it. I like keep it in very good order, you know, blah, blah, blah. And she was like, okay. And then when I told her I was diagnosed with autism, she's like, yeah, okay, it makes sense. Because I think for me, the biggest thing, well, for us, was always my inflexibility. And I know inflexibility is one of executive functions that can come up with ADHD. But for me, like, I like rigid routines, don't I? Like, I like routine. I have to have routine, but not to the point where it's all right, you know, it's good for me. Like I have to have routine. But a lot with ADHD, routine's good for them. But a lot of people with ADHD don't like routine, right? It doesn't come naturally. Routine, order comes very naturally to me, doesn't it? Right? My organization is one of my highest executive functions. Planning is one of my highest executive functions. Flexibility is my lowest, because I have organization, but it's almost kind of too much. I'm very organized, over organized, to the point where if a change happens, I get really stressed. I can't deal with it. I get really, really overwhelmed. It causes me a really emotional outburst. I really struggle with it. I think that's the biggest thing for me. Also with sensory, it is like really heightened. And I know people with ADHD struggle with sensory, but mine is, I would say, is very severe. Like I have to have, you know, noise. Like I've got headphones, I've got, you know, going to sleep, I can't have main lights on, you know, all these things that I actually think come out. People used to think was emotional overload, but it actually was sensory overload. And we've learned a lot, the difference now, haven't we, between emotional kind of regulation and sensory overload. But for me, I think most of the time it's sensory overload, isn't it, rather than emotional. Yeah, a lot of the time, like I actually just can't deal with the sensory world, so I really struggle with that. And then the last one for me is social. A lot of people that I meet with ADHD are very, very, very emotionally in tune with other people. I've got a feeling, so if Ben's feeling sad, I've got a feeling, but then I have to ask you 50 times, are you sad, are you sad, are you sad, are you sad, are you sad? I can't distinguish how people feel. Yeah, I don't know. And like if someone says to me, like, you know, like when you were a child and they used to be like, how do you feel today? I'd be like, I have no idea. Like I can't tell people how I feel. I don't know how I feel. Emotion to me, like I am very empathetic, and I am very good at sensing, I know when there's something wrong, but that's more of a sense rather than a knowing of the feeling and the emotion. I really struggle with social cues. I'm very, very, very good at picking up finer detail, but people with ADHD are more kind of big picture thinking. Like I see the detail. I'm like, yes, I'm also big picture thinking, but I see the detail, right? I like lots of stuff, right? Because people with ADHD like lots of stuff, but it has to be in order, right? It has to be in order. Like we have a lot of people come to our house and, oh my God, you got a lot of stuff, but it's very neat. You know, it's that thing of I'm organized, but I'm also messy. You know, I like to be spontaneous, but I also hate it. I like to be spontaneous and I'm like, yeah, let's go and do something. But after an hour, I'm like, no. Or does it fit in with my plan? You know, let's plan spontaneity. You can't plan spontaneity. You just do it, right? I have to have order. I like organization, but then I like to have a bit of a flexibility with it to an extent that's controlled. And I think, and like my sensory, you know, I want to go out and do all these things, but then my ASD has the impact of that. And I think that for me, like almost like the ADHD diagnosis, I'm even getting confused now. The ADHD diagnosis didn't fit me completely. No. And I think that there were so many answers still ungone, especially with the kind of, I know it's quite a long answer, but kind of the sensory, like to an extreme, and all senses, it's not just one or two, it's everything. And sensory overload coming out in emotional regulation, the repetitive behaviors, the special hyperfixations that are quite extreme. They don't just go away after 10 minutes. Yeah. They're, you know, lifelong, like I just love unicorns and like musicals and like repetitive songs on repetitive like stories in like things. I don't really like storybooks. I like non-fiction books. The social world, emotions, and then kind of order and organization. Yeah. I think for me, they're the biggest differences for me.
Well, that was a long answer. So perhaps it's time for a break.
Yeah,
so people can digest that. So we'll be back after this.
And we're out. If you would like any more information on Indigo Hub or our Indigo support group, then please check out our website below or our link to our social media platforms, or email at indigohub.adhd@gmail.com. If you would like to offer any comments, feedback, get support, or if you're interested in the world hearing your story, then please reach out through any of our avenues. As said before, have a positive week. Check in again later. And we're out. Shh, the Indigo Diaries.
And we're back. Okay, so let's get right back to it. Challenges with ASD. The biggest challenges. What are they?
I mean, I kind of just said it.
Well, yeah, I guess.
But
I mean, if you could list them, perhaps,
okay,
rather than describe.
I think for me the biggest challenge is sensory. I think that's always been the biggest thing for me. I think that, like, so when I'm talking about sensory, I'm talking about a list of, I'm talking more about like the sound, the lights, taste, touch. I don't like, oh, I like strokes. What is that? Oh, I makes me feel sick. I don't like gooey things. Even thinking about textures can actually make me feel sick. Also vestibular, like movement. I get really bad seasickness, and like even driving. Like I was in the back of a taxi last week and almost threw up. Like, I mean, he was like, "Get out of my car. Are you drunk?" I was like, "No, I don't drink." And he was like, "Get out." Like, I'm honestly gonna be sick. And I would say also the rigidity, kind of inflexibility, how they call it, but it of like the world and like when a plan changes and it's not in my control, I find it really hard to be able to kind of flexible my mind to go, oh, okay, let's do it this way, or let's do it that way. Or if something doesn't go as planned, so like let's say we're going to do something but it finishes early, then well, what do I do with that time? I expected it to finish here, and then it's like it's almost like your executive function have to go, okay, now I have to reorganize it, do this. And I've recently learned that that's another part of my brain called your singular gyrus, but that's another story for another time. I like,
Thank God for that.
And then I think for me it's navigating the social world. I think that the emotions thing, I actually thought I was very good at distinguishing people's emotions, but as we actually started going through the process of like I'm learning this course of social world, I actually realized that my social skills are actually I really struggle with. I've always struggled with rejection, which is obviously because I struggle with knowing how people feel. Then I almost feel like they're rejecting me when usually things haven't got anything to do with me. But I can't distinguish how someone feels, which is why, like, my mum and my sister said, and my dad used to say, I used to drive them crazy by going, "Are you okay? You okay? You okay? You okay? Are you feeling okay? Are you okay?"
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't distinguish it. And I can't read social cues, but I can read details. I couldn't read social cues. I think one of the biggest things for me as well was I had really specific interests and like with ADHD, like you have, everyone, it's, a kind of, they say a deficit of interest, but like I have very specific interests and very unique, and they don't go away. They're there. And that sometimes can be hard because people don't share that same passion for things like that. And I think for me, the biggest challenge was just being so different from everybody else. And I think that a lot of it I used to think that was my ADHD, but I actually think a lot of my differences and a lot of my biggest challenges come down to my ASD.
Yeah.
And my coach friend actually said something to me, which I thought was really interesting. Can I just share? She said that ASD was my foundation and my ADHD was almost like the add-on. And what she meant by that was like the ASD, the order and all that sort of stuff is essential. Like I have to have that. The spontaneity and like, having a fizzy drink when it shouldn't, and, doing something, and having the kind of, doing exercise and all that kind of comes after.
Yeah.
If I'm sensory overloaded, I'm not going to be able to have the energy to go out and do stuff.
Yeah.
It's almost like ASD is my foundation and ADHD comes after that.
Yeah.
And before, I've been so focused on ADHD that I've not focused on the ASD. And And a lot of sometimes my ADHD strategies have actually not worked because I've not been encompassing that.
Very interesting. So has the diagnosis changed anything about you, or has it given you anything new, would you say?
Well, I mean, it's only 4 weeks, but I think for me, the biggest thing it's changed is the permission.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I think after the ADHD, it was like, oh my God, like I chucked myself into it, didn't I? And then like, you know, I went through so much change, but I almost feel that there was still a barrier. Like I was still being myself, but we were in lockdown. So I feel like when we were in lockdown, my ASD was like thriving because I didn't have the sensory, I didn't have the people, I didn't have the social world, and I didn't have that much change because we were in our environments. And then when I came home back to the UK, I really struggled. I struggled to navigate people. I struggled to navigate environments. And I struggled to navigate people's change of plans and stuff like that because there was a lot out of my control. And it almost, I felt like I'd gone backwards, like in my journey, because I felt like I've come home and I can't cope. It's almost too much. And a lot of my ADHD strategies didn't work anymore. And then, so I think for me, the biggest thing is, you know, in the past 4 years, I've really been unmasking, discovering myself and discovering my strengths. And I mean, so much has changed. Like our whole lifestyle has changed, hasn't it? You know?
Yeah.
And like the way I see myself, my perception, my self-confidence, my compassion. But the biggest thing it's given me is probably compassion for myself, that it's okay to be sensory overloaded. It's okay to wear headphones. It's okay on firework night, which is one of the hardest nights of the year, to wear headphones, a head thing, and headphones.
Yeah.
That it's okay. And I still think that, like, what I realized is, like, my sister said to me, oh, can you do something on this day? And I'd be like, no, I've got exercise. Like, no. But then, like, she'd be like, oh, do you want to go here where it's busy, and then this and this and this and this and this? And I'd be like, yeah, okay. And it's almost like my ADHD, I had boundaries to say no because I knew about it. But when my ASD was suffering, like, we'd gone on holiday. We went on holiday in the summer, and we, like, literally, I finished work and we went. And then it was like boom, 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 boom. And then, like, day 4, I was so tired. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't travel. I thought we were getting old. Like, I can't do it anymore. Like, I'm so tired. And it was because my ASD wasn't being recognized. I didn't have the strategies. I didn't have the things in place for it, because it was like a whole other part, which, in a way, coming back to the differences, I say it's like the tug of Tash. It's almost like I'm the mum and I've got 2 teenagers in my head going, Tash, I really want to, I don't know, have chocolate. No, don't have chocolate, like, have it later. Or, you know, I really want to go out right now and have friends and go out and do this and this and this. And Bed's going, you've had a really hard day, you want to sit on the sofa, sit with your weighted blanket and do nothing. And it's almost kind of, they are very much opposites in quite a lot of ways. Similarities in lot, but they are opposites. And it's about kind of managing that. And now I have the name for it. It's almost kind of like, oh, I'm going to give myself permission to do that, because it's not a Tash thing. It's an autism thing. Yeah. So and like, not that I need permission to do these things. I don't need permission to put headphones on. It makes no difference to anyone else's life but me. But it's almost like it's given me the validation. It's validation. It's given me the validation and the acceptance to not only accept ADHD, because I fully accept my ADHD. Every hands down, I'll go waffle, I'll do whatever, I'll, you know, lose my like concentration and go, oh, sorry, what were you saying? You know, like, I'm very open about that. But I think because I didn't know about my ASD, it almost felt like it was still a character flaw. Right. But now, because I know I've got the validation, it's given me permission to live my life the way I have. Yeah. And how much changes have we made in the past 4 weeks?
Loads.
Yeah, we don't have big lights on, sensory blankets, we've changed things within ourselves. I don't really get sensory overloaded. I've changed my whole business around, my timetable. So much has come from it, and yeah.
Good stuff. So with all these challenges and even benefits as well, how do you manage them?
Well, the first thing I did was get an ADHD and autism coach, because I really wanted someone, you know, because I've had ADHD coaches for so many years, and my ADHD coach is incredible, and I will be going back to her. But I needed someone, you know, that had got that perspective of both. So that's the first thing I did. And the second thing was just learning about it. I didn't chuck myself so much in because I'm doing so many courses and everything else. So, you know, I already knew quite a lot about it. I read an amazing book called Unmasking Autism by Devon Price. Yes, yeah, okay, I've got it right. I had to remember it then. But and that really helped me see the woman side of it, woman traits of ASD, and I think that helped me. But I think for me, it's just kind of stripping back and going like, what haven't I put in place? And I think for me was learning the difference between ASD and my ADHD and how they present.
Yeah. And
then, like I said, how they work against each other, and then how I can put things in place or adapt what I already have to to meet the needs of my ASD as well as my ADHD. Because someone said this famous thing, I really love it. ADHD is like your ASD tax. Like your ADHD excitement and excitability almost like kills your ASD, like, because like you're tired, right?
Yeah.
But then your ADHD is like, let's do this, and then your ASD is like, no. And I think it's just about kind of coming more neutral.
Yeah.
And look at from like the nervous system and like the polyvagal theory. If anyone doesn't have a look at that, I've put a link below. It's amazing. The polyvagal thing, I'm like, what is it that I need?
Yeah.
What do I need in this moment? Am I sensory overloaded? Yeah. Okay. Do I need regulation? Yeah. Okay. What do I need for that? And I think for me, managing it is about kind of discovering it, being aware of it in the moment, which is very difficult, and then putting what I need in place and giving myself permission to do that. And for me, like the biggest thing for me is like the first thing I did, I mean, Amazon love me right now because like, you know, I like chewing things, but I'd never give myself, like all my drinks are with straws, right? I've always been doing things with my hands, but my hands are not always busy. I like chewing things, so I bought bad teeth. And like, so I bought some chews. I don't have main lights anymore. We bought like loads of lamps. I've got a thing in my, you know, thing. And now in my bag, I've got like little, my bag used to be a whole mess and it used to stress me autism out. So now I need a lot of stuff because I like to have a lot of stuff with me. But now I've got like little bags. I've got like a bag of squishy things, a bag of like, you know, like home things, a bag of like electronics and in my bag. So it's all organized, but then it's all, there's a lot of stuff with my, you know, my ADHD. And like, it was really about trying to distinguish what's my ADHD and what's my, and then how can I mix them together? And I think a lot of my strategies I already had in place for my ADHD, it was just about adapting them and then giving myself permission to do them. And I'm owning it now, and it's a good feeling. I said to my ADHD coach last week, I said, for the first time, I feel whole. I think my ADHD was the first. It was almost like the domino effect, right? Yeah. My ADHD was like the first one. Then this came, then this came, then this. My coaching came over, and then my ASD has been my last one. Yeah, I'm still going to discover more about myself. I hopefully, you know, no more neurodiversity. 4 is enough for me, but you know, it's opened a whole new world and a whole new perspective. And right now I'm at the beginning of my journey, but I'm not, because I've got all this knowledge of ADHD, and it's just about adapting that to meet this other side of me, this other teenage girl in, you know, in my head.
Brilliant. So last question then. What's next for Natasha Hickling?
You have to use my full name.
Yeah. 2 minutes, go.
I think for me, coming on here and speaking this was something I wanted to do. As soon as I was diagnosed, I was like, right, we're doing a podcast. Because for me, expressing it is a massive thing. I think for me is just more discovery, more acceptance, more compassion, more everything, just more being me. And the last 4 years, I've really changed a lot to be me, but it's just more discovery and more parts of myself where I can really, really, really thrive in this world. And I think after my ADHD diagnosis, there was still so much. And now it's almost like the last month, I felt more content than, and it sounds a bit cheesy, than ever before. But yeah, because it's almost like great. That knowledge is just there now. What's next with me in business? Well, we'll go from there, you know. Maybe ASD coaching, you know, might be on the cards soon. I mean, even though some of my clients have, you know, this, that, and because ADHD doesn't usually come by itself. But I think, you know, doing courses in ASD, reading more books about it, thriving myself in it, getting involved, going to support groups or whatever, but just going on this journey on my own pace and being okay with that, and just yeah, more acceptance. I think that's the word, and more living the life the way I need it versus what, you know, everything else.
Brilliant. All right. Well, that's a wrap, in it.
Well, yeah, encouragement.
Oh, go on then. What, this one?
I've got two.
Which one do you want me to do? Or are you doing?
I'll do both.
Oh, all right.
So this is my favorite ever quote, and I didn't read it out for my last episode, but I have read it for one. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. For my whole life, I tried to fix me. I tried to fix me, who I was, everything that I am, by masking, by putting in things, by doing what everyone else wanted me to do. But it wasn't that was the problem. It was that everything I was surrounding myself was was the struggle, was the challenge. Things are still challenging, things are still hard, but I make my environment fit me rather than me fit the environment. And that's what it's all about. And this thing for me is my last straw to make me really have my environment for me and to feel whole. And yeah, my last one is do your own thing on your own terms and get what you came here for. And that's what I'm doing. And finally, I feel that my neurodiversity is whole now because I know it all. Yeah. I don't know everything in my life, you know, I'm still going to learn more things about myself, but I think these are the biggest things that I'm going to come. And, you know, and it is late. I'm 30, but I know people that are diagnosed at 60, and it's just about what can we do now?
Yeah, that's right. Excellent.
Okay. So that's my episode, the last piece of my puzzle, which is autism. So in the end, do you want me to do the end bit? Do you want to sign off?
Yeah. So in 2 weeks, we'll be dropping a new podcast episode with either a new episode to series 1 with a story or another amazing guest expert like me.
In series 3.
If you're interested in coming on as a guest for Pick My Brain sessions, have questions, dilemmas, or want to share your experiences, you would like to advise on or series 1 where the world can hear your story, please reach out through social media or email. Come, listen, learn, experience the world through not my
eyes, our eyes. Why not? Have a great week, and remember, don't fix the environment. Don't fix you. Fix the environment. Or just don't fix the environment. Just change it up. Have fun, add sparkle, and do what's right for you.
And we're out.
Dear diary.
Dear diary.
Dear diary.
Today is ending. I'll check in again tomorrow.
Tomorrow is a brand new beginning.
Good night, sweet dreams.
I think tomorrow will be...
Shh.